Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. For a long time, I believed that people naturally gravitate toward leaders who are always caring and collaborative. That if I showed up with integrity and empathy and consistency, well, people would recognize that and they'll choose to follow it. But surprisingly, I've actually seen situations that challenge that assumption. So I did a bit of research to find out why that isn't always the case. In some instances throughout my career, I've watched teams rally around leaders who were abrupt, controlling, and at times very difficult to work with. I would often wonder why people weren't jumping ship all over the place. What made them stay? What stood out to me was that people were fully aware of it, and that in certain conditions, those leaders were still preferred. It just didn't make sense. So today I'm going to explore that situation because there is some research behind it that helps to explain why this happens. And it has real implications for how we think about leadership. But before we get too far into it, if you like this kind of video and you want to support my channel, please take a moment to hit that like button and please subscribe to my channel and maybe come back for future videos. Now let's get into it. So there is a body of research, including work by Rast, that specifically looks at leadership preferences during periods of uncertainty. What it shows is that when people feel unsure about their environment or their role or even their own standing, they tend to shift their thinking in what they value in a leader. Maybe not so surprisingly, clarity becomes more important than warmth. Direction becomes more important than collaboration. To some extent, that actually makes sense. And looking back at my own leadership journey, I can see how during certain situations, I also preferred those qualities. I used to work for someone who was very abrupt and she didn't pull any punches. I used to have to steel myself a little before going into meetings with her because you just never knew what kind of reaction you might get. Yet, when I think back, there were times that she would stand up so brazenly in situations that might have others cowering. And in those moments, I really appreciated that more dominant or directive leadership style. It felt more reassuring, even when those behaviors would normally be seen as negative. And no, this doesn't mean that people suddenly prefer poor treatment. That's not what I'm saying at all. It means that the need for certainty can override other considerations. And I've actually seen this play out in other settings as well. So during periods of organizational change, especially when roles are shifting or there are concerns about job security, teams often look for someone who appears decisive and confident. Someone who's sharing very clearly. Even if that leader shuts down discussion or moves on too quickly, there can be a sense of relief in having someone who seems sure of what they're doing. And on the surface, it can look like people are accepting behavior they wouldn't normally tolerate. But underneath that, there is often a different dynamic. People are trying to reduce ambiguity. Of course they are. And that is where the best leaders can shine. When you're not sure what's coming next, if you are being clear or giving very rigid direction, that can feel easier to work in than an open-ended, highly collaborative approach. Sometimes being too gentle and sensitive are not what's needed in the situation. And the reason this is so important to understand is because there are a few ways to think about this from a leadership perspective. First, context matters more than we often acknowledge. Leadership advice is often presented as universally applicable, but in practice, what people need from a leader can shift quite quickly depending on what they're experiencing. During stable periods, people may place more value on inclusion and development and shared decision making. But during uncertain periods, the priority can shift toward structure and decisiveness. This is more situational leadership. People need to remember that they shouldn't just assume that one style of leadership is the only way to be successful. Every leader needs to understand how to adapt based on the situation. Secondly, confidence signals can be misinterpreted. So when someone presents with strong certainty, especially in a high-pressure environment, it can create a sense of safety for others. The challenge is that confidence and competence are not always aligned. A leader who appears very sure may not necessarily be making the best decisions. But in the moment, that distinction can be very difficult for teams to assess. And remember, sometimes the command and control style of leadership does have its place if it will help to put people at ease. Thirdly, this creates a risk for organizations. If dominant leadership styles are continually reinforced during uncertain periods, they can become normalized. And over time, that can impact psychological safety and culture, limit input from others, and reduce the quality of decision making. What initially helped people feel grounded can start to narrow how the team thinks and operates. So what does this mean in practice? Well, I think it calls for a bit more awareness on both sides. For leaders, it's useful to recognize that during uncertain times, people may be looking for clarity and direction more than anything else. Providing that structure doesn't require becoming overly controlling or dismissive. It can be as simple as being clear about priorities, explaining decisions, and setting boundaries around what is known and what is still evolving. And always be clear about when you're sharing that in that situation, you are not looking for collaboration or shared decision making. And for teams, there's value in pausing and noticing what draws you to a particular leader or style, especially during stressful periods. Sometimes what feels like strong leadership is actually a response to uncertainty rather than an indicator of effectiveness. And in the long term, that may have serious consequences for your own work experience. I don't think this changes the importance of empathy or respect in leadership. What it does is add a layer of nuance. People don't evaluate leadership fairly. It's just the opposite. They evaluate it based on how they're feeling in a given moment and what they need to feel steady in their environment. Well, I hope that provided you a bit of insight, and if you did find this useful, just a reminder that I'd appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed to my channel. And if this topic does resonate with you and your own experience, please feel free to share your thoughts. I'd love to hear it in the comments. Thanks so much again for watching, and until next time, keep on striving, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.